Have you ever wondered what to look out for when investing in a short-term Airbnb property? Well, I've been in the industry for 8 years and I wanted to share my experience of it all. So in today's video, we're going to analyze a hustle and bustle city like Toronto to determine if it's still a smart move to make. And before we get into it, if you like the content we're sharing, go ahead and subscribe. And if you think someone can benefit from this video, feel free to share it amongst your community. So before Airbnb was even in the picture, a lot of people were seizing opportunities in real estate, buying and selling homes to build their fortunes. Most homeowners at the time were leasing their property out on long-term rentals using 1 to 2 year lease agreements, maintaining a stable and steady flow of the rental market. The Airbnb platform started in around 2008, but things only started to kick off in Toronto around 2010 with only about 80 listings on the platform at the time. After that, things picked up pretty quickly, eventually reaching around 12,000 listings in 2016. Since then, there's been a surge of short-term rentals, and some went as far as participating in Airbnb arbitrages, which is basically where you're renting multiple units or homes at one time in search for a higher earning potential. When I first got introduced to the industry, a friend of mine showed me his operation, and I was pretty impressed with it, to the point where I myself thought I would do well with it. When I first started, there were no regulations in place as long as your building allowed it. The buildings that didn't allow it would find hosts who went against their restrictions. Now, the influx of listings came with some major challenges in the last couple of years. After protests and platforms like Airbnb started, there was a constant push towards the government to create more regulations amongst the community. There were a lot of discrepancies happening with irresponsible hosts and guests that created more havoc. Buildings started getting tainted by shootings and rowdy guests destroying units while impacting the peace of the community. A lot of these negative experiences were coming from hosts who were not screening their guests properly or doing their due diligence to make sure they had more strict policies in place to avoid loud and rowdy guests. Toronto B&Bers started hitting news headlines, and there was a lot of negative feedback circulating towards certain buildings in the city. Some went as far as classifying them as ghost hotels. It ultimately gave the community a bad name, and regulations started going into motion. The first set of regulations started in 2017 that Mayor John Tory implemented, changing the zoning bylaws to create a category labeled short-term rentals and starting a registry for anyone operating under a short-term rental unit. Shortly after that, in January of 2018, City Council approved the regulation of short-term rentals in Toronto, a licensing and registration program which included a 4% municipal accommodation tax. Short-term operators were also required to register with the city and pay a $50 annual fee on top of a list full of other requirements. The biggest adjustment made during this regulation was that short-term operators were no longer allowed to rent their place out for less than 28 days out of 180 days of the year. So to clarify this, let's break things down. According to the regulations, short-term is defined as any rental period less than 28 days. You're only allowed to be a short-term operator by renting your principal residence, meaning no investment properties are allowed. Short-term rentals are limited to 180 days per year. There's a 4% tax that must be paid on each rental. And number 5 is that you must register with the city and pay a $50 annual registration fee. The 6th restriction happened in 2022 when Toronto released a VHT vacant home tax for the purpose of taxing primary owners who had their homes vacant for longer than 6 months. And if you didn't declare your residency status, you'd be taxed on the full portion, that being 1% of the current property value assessment plus interest for late payment. The integration of these regulations cut the number of listings by half, and some saw a 47% decrease of listings, while Airbnb alone deactivated listings that did not have a license number. So the regulations combined with the housing affordability crisis makes it much more difficult to consider Airbnb in Toronto. Housing options are out of reach for many, and with record levels of immigration in Canada expected in the coming years, experts are predicting that the problem will only amplify if no action is taken to put a stop to things. In fact, just in August, the city came down with more adopted changes coming into effect in 2 phases. The first would take effect on September 30th, and the second would happen on January 1st of 2025. So on September 30th, they announced you'd be asked to submit at least 2 documents in addition to your government-issued ID for additional proof of your primary residence. You also may be asked to attend an in-person interview with the city to present information and documents that may be required to evaluate your eligibility and be issued or renewed a short-term rental registration. The city will have the authority to conduct annual inspections of all registered short-term rentals. And when a registration is revoked, you will not be able to apply for a new registration for at least 1 year, and no other person will be able to apply for registration related to your address for 1 year. So only one registration would be allowed per unit. For other units with multiple existing registrations, the operator who has held a registration for the longest period of time would only be permitted to renew. And on January 1st, 2025, you would need to choose between registering as an entire unit operator or as a partial unit operator for the duration of your registration period. If you have a partial unit rental where you're basically only short-term renting rooms in your home, you can only advertise one fewer than the number of bedrooms available in your principal residence. Partial unit rental operators cannot rent out the entire unit at the same time. And last but not least, they're increasing the fee from $50 to $375. So it seems like every year they're coming up with something new and pressing, which basically discourages short-term renters to continue their practice. I mean, think about it. You work so hard to buy a property. That property then gets authorized by the city to make restrictions that you have to abide by. And if you go against those restrictions, you're no longer allowed to do what works best for you to generate an income. The root of the housing crisis derives from hundreds of thousands of people entering the country legally and illegally. And you can see how they are navigating that pressure by applying an endless amount of regulations. I mean, at this rate, I would not be surprised if it eventually becomes illegal to be a short-term renter in Toronto. The Toronto housing market poses many challenges for short-term renters. With increased expenses, it's tougher to cover the monthly bills, turn a profit, or break even, especially when considering the annual expenses and the 180-day rental limitation. With that said, when you're looking into investing into a short-term property, you want to make sure you have an annual breakdown of all your monthly expenses in order to make the best decision moving forward. And if you haven't already seen my video on this, I've demonstrated a list of things that you need to calculate for before investing in an Airbnb property. So go ahead and click on the link below to view that video. Now, if you already own a property and you're on the fence about converting it into a short-term rental, it's important to consider the pros and cons. At the end of the day, the potential returns must be greater than the increased challenges and expenses. So here are a list of things you can do to maximize your earning potential in Toronto. Commit to 180 days of short-term rentals and then rent your place out on a long-term lease for the other days in the year. Focus on maximizing the 180 days through a great-looking place that's clutter-free and extra clean for your guests. Get as many 5-star reviews as possible and focus on becoming a superhost. This will only help boost your booking potential. Make sure your rates are congruent with the market. Check out other listings to make sure your place is fairly priced and also enough for you to break even. Hire a decor specialist to make sure your place looks good and feels great for all your guests. Make sure your check-in process is as smooth as possible, and make sure your rules and instructions have a balance that's enough to convey your expectations clearly but not so overwhelming that they're deterred from booking with you. Next, you want to install a sound monitor to maintain peace with your neighbors. Screen your guests carefully and ensure they have great reviews to avoid any type of crisis. Inform your neighbors as well about your short-term rental activities so they are confident that you are hosting responsible guests and taking proactive measures to maintain a peaceful environment without any potential issues. As an alternative to the above, you can also hire a co-host, which allows you to be hands-off so you don't have to worry about the everyday operations. This is something that you should only consider if it's a feasible option for you to do so. Remember, the key is to allow yourself to generate a profit after clearing your expenses. Most co-hosts will charge anywhere from 8% to 20% from each booking, so keep that in mind. Do your research and look out for someone who has been in the business for a while and has already managed operations similar to your property. During your interviewing process, you want to make sure you're hiring someone that you can trust and have a positive relationship with. If you're worried about the regulatory headaches that come with Toronto short-term rentals, you might want to consider some other opportunities that will allow you to generate a passive income. These include things like long-term rentals. Investing in traditional long-term rentals are less affected by short-term regulatory changes, and while the returns might not be as rapid, they often come with more stability and fewer operational challenges. Real estate crowdfunding. Platforms like Fundrise and Realty Mogul allow you to invest in real estate projects with smaller amounts of capital. This can provide exposure to real estate without the hands-on management of a property. Dividend stocks. Consider stocks that pay regular dividends. These can provide a steady income stream and you can reinvest dividends to increase your holdings over time. Real estate investment trusts. These are companies that own, operate, and finance income-producing real estate across various sectors. They often distribute a significant portion of their income as dividends. Peer-to-peer lending. Platforms like Prosper or Lending Club allow you to lend money money directly to individuals or small businesses. Returns can be higher than traditional saving accounts, but it also comes with higher risk. Cryptocurrency. For those willing to take on greater risk, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum, including many altcoins, have shown significant returns. However, it's a volatile market and not suitable for everyone. Precious metals. Investing in gold, silver, or other precious metals is often considered a hedge against inflation. Precious metals can also be a physical asset that holds value over time. Investing in art, vintage cards, or other collectibles can be both enjoyable and potentially profitable, but it also requires expertise and a good understanding of the market. Remember, the best financial strategy depends on your financial goals, risk tolerance, and the amount of time and effort you're willing to put into managing your investments. It's important to always conduct thorough research or consult with a financial advisor before making significant investment decisions. When weighing the decision to Airbnb your place in Toronto, it's crucial to assess both the regulations and drawbacks to be sure that the benefits outweigh the challenges. If you find that after crunching the numbers for potential earnings with the 180-day window, there's a significant profit margin after your expenses, then it is worth serious consideration. However, bear in mind that renting long-term for the remaining months is essential to sidestep that vacant tax. If after careful evaluation you're not making a substantial profit or merely breaking even, it might be wise to explore other investments. Managing a listing, especially in a popular area like Toronto, demands a chunk of effort, so you want to choose your ventures wisely. Typically, it's the individuals that already own properties and have navigated through the regulations successfully who have been able to maintain profitability despite the hurdles. But if you're entering the market now without much disposable income to enhance your property's potential, turning a profit can be challenging, especially considering today's inflation and interest. Any potential future regulations are in the hands of the government, and their impact on addressing the housing crisis is not certain. But I'll dive deeper into this topic in a future video and explore whether these restrictions are actually making a difference. As we conclude our exploration into the world of Airbnb in Toronto, I hope you've gained valuable insight here. Remember, real estate is a dynamic landscape, and what might be true today could change tomorrow. If you found this video informative, give it a thumbs up, turn on post notifications, share and subscribe for more valuable content. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and until next time, take care and bye-bye.